The first public radio broadcast, which took place in 1895, the echo of genius, and the first sparks imagined the late 19th century, a time when long-distance communication was limited by cables and telegraphs. News traveled slowly, and the idea of a voice crossing the ocean wirelessly seemed like pure science fiction. But in the laboratories and minds of a few visionary scientists, this fiction was about to become reality. Radio was not born from a single eureka moment, but rather from a collection of discoveries and advances made by brilliant minds around the globe. Let's begin our journey with the precursors. In the mid-19th century, the Scottish physicist James Clerk Maxwell, an extraordinary, developed a mathematical theory that predicted the existence of electromagnetic waves, forms of energy that travel through space at the speed of light. Maxwell theorized that light, electricity, and magnetism were manifestations of the same phenomenon. His famous Maxwell equations, published in 1864, were the theoretical basis for what would become radio. Think of Maxwell as the invisible architect, drawing up the plans for a bridge no one yet knew how to build. Maxwell's theory was revolutionary, but it needed experimental proof. And this is where the German physicist Heinrich Hertz comes in. In 1887, Hertz managed, for the first time, to generate and detect these electromagnetic waves. In his laboratory, he used an induction coil to create sparks that generated radio waves and a ring of wire with a small gap to detect them. When the sparks jumped in the induction coil, tiny sparks were visible in the gap in the ring, proving the existence of the waves predicted by Maxwell. Hertz's experiment was the aha that turned the theory into reality. He proved that radio waves existed, that they could be created and detected, opening the door to their practical application. Hertz's discoveries were pure fundamental science at the time. He himself did not immediately foresee the commercial application of his waves. He died young, in 1894, without seeing the true revolution his research would unleash. But news of his experiment spread quickly through scientific circles, igniting a spark in the minds of other innovators. Among these innovators was a 21-year-old Italian named Guglielmo Marconi. Marconi, the son of a wealthy Italian father and an Irish mother, was a self-taught man with a passion for electricity and Hertz's discoveries. He was not an academic scientist, but a practical engineer with a clear vision to use Hertz's waves to send messages wirelessly. For him, Hertz's sparks were not just an interesting physical phenomenon. They were the key to a new form of communication. Marconi set up a small laboratory on his family's estate, Villa Grifone, outside Bologna, Italy. He began replicating Hertz's experiments, but with one obsession: improving transmission and reception distances. He made a series of crucial innovations. First, he improved Hertz's transmitter, using an antenna of vertical wire and a grounding rod, a wire connected to the ground, which significantly increased the signal's range. Imagine him there, a determined young man, connecting and disconnecting wires, adjusting improvised antennas in his garden. He also improved the receiver, using a coherer, a glass tube filled with metal filings that, when struck by radio waves, reduced its resistance and allowed the electric current to pass. This coherer was, in effect, a radio-activated switch, essential for detecting signals. At first, Marconi's transmissions were modest, reaching a few meters within his laboratory. But he persisted. In 1895, after months of tireless experiments, he managed to transmit signals over greater distances. The story goes that he asked his brother and a friend to take the receiver to a distant point on the property, and upon hearing the signal, a simple click, they threw a white flag in response. It was a rudimentary signal, but it was proof. Radio waves could carry information beyond line of sight and wirelessly. Also in 1895, and this is the focal point of our story, Marconi conducted what is widely considered the first public radio broadcast to a wider audience, albeit informally. He demonstrated his invention to people outside his immediate circle, including some neighboring landowners and perhaps some local officials. Although there was no formal broadcast as we know it today with radio programs, he demonstrated the ability to send Morse code signals wirelessly over a considerable distance. For the time, distances were still limited, but the idea was planted. This demonstration was a milestone. For the first time, radio wave technology was not just a laboratory experiment, but something that could be witnessed and understood by ordinary people. Marconi's vision of a wireless world was beginning to come to fruition. However, he faced skepticism. When he tried to interest the Italian government in his invention, he was ignored. Frustrated, he decided to take his technology to England in 1896, a country with a strong naval tradition and a keen interest in wireless communications for its ships. There, he found more fertile ground. His father, Giuseppe Marconi, an influential businessman, encouraged him to seek opportunities abroad, providing him with the means to travel. In England, Marconi found a crucial ally in William Preece, the chief engineer of the British Post Office. Preece was impressed by Marconi's demonstrations and provided him with resources and support. With Preece's help, Marconi patented his invention in the UK in 1896 and began conducting more ambitious and public demonstrations, transmitting signals over ever-increasing distances, including across the English Channel. Despite Marconi's success, it is crucial to note that he was not alone in this endeavor. Other inventors were working on similar projects, and in some cases, even independently, making parallel discoveries. A notable example is the Russian Alexander Popov, who demonstrated an electromagnetic wave receiver in 1895, almost simultaneously with Marconi's first demonstrations. Popov is credited by many as the inventor of radio in Russia and parts of Eastern Europe, and his research focused on lightning detectors. In the United States, Nikola Tesla was also experimenting with wireless communication and obtained patents related to wireless power transmission systems, which some argue covered fundamental principles used in radio. However, the practical and commercial application of radio, with the clear goal of communication, was Marconi's greatest achievement. The story, as always, is complex and full of overlapping ideas and inventions. But for the purposes of public broadcasting, the focus remains on Marconi. Marconi's first demonstration in England was on Salisbury Plain, where he successfully transmitted signals over a distance of 3 miles, approximately 4.8 kilometers. These increasingly impressive demonstrations were crucial in convincing investors and the British government of the technology's potential. The wave spreads and communication transforms. With his success in England, Marconi quickly founded the Wireless Telegraph and Signal Company, later renamed the Marconi Company, in 1897. This was the decisive step in transforming a scientific curiosity into a global industry. He began installing radio stations at various locations, including lighthouses and ships, realizing the immense potential of wireless communication for maritime safety. Imagine the difference it would make to a ship on the high seas. The ability to call for help or transmit messages without needing to return to port or use carrier pigeons. One of Marconi's first major tests and successes of radio occurred in 1899, when he established wireless communication between England and France across the English Channel. This proved the viability of radio for international communications. News of this achievement spread quickly, fascinating the public and cementing Marconi's reputation as the father of radio. That same year, Marconi's radio had one of its first practical and dramatic uses. In a naval incident, a vessel that had collided with another in fog managed to send a distress call using Marconi's wireless telegraphy, resulting in the saving of several lives. This event powerfully demonstrated the value of radio for safety, especially at sea. The image of sailors lost in fog, now with an invisible lifeline, was powerful, but the big leap forward came in 1901. Marconi accomplished a feat many considered impossible. He sent the first transatlantic radio signal. From a transmitting station in Poldhu, Cornwall, England, he transmitted the Morse code for the letter S 3 short dots to a receiving station in St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada. Imagine the tension in Marconi's room, the anticipation, and the euphoria when the signal was finally received. It was a moment of triumph, a milestone that proved that radio waves could indeed cross the Atlantic Ocean, bypassing the Earth's curvature of feet that challenged the then scientific understanding of long-range radio waves. Some scientists believed that the Earth's curvature would block the waves. Marconi proved that the ionosphere, a layer of the atmosphere, reflected the waves, enabling long-distance transmission. This event generated massive coverage in the global press and catapulted Marconi to international stardom. He was no longer just an inventor. He was an icon, a visionary who had shortened the planet's distances. However, radio, as Marconi developed it, was primarily for wireless telegraphy, that is, transmitting messages in Morse code. The goal was to replace wired telegraphy, especially in places where cables were impractical or dangerous to install, such as at sea or in rough terrain. The idea of transmitting the human voice or music was still in its early stages. The human voice is far more complex to transmit than a simple dot or dash of Morse code. This is where other pioneers come into play. Reginald Fessenden, a Canadian-American inventor, is often credited with achieving the first transmission of voice and music. In 1900, he transmitted the human voice for a short time, but his most famous achievement occurred on Christmas Eve, 1906. Fessenden, working at Brant Rock, Massachusetts, transmitted what is widely considered the first public radio broadcast of music and voice. Sailors on U.S. Navy ships along the East Coast and radio operators at shore stations, accustomed to hearing only the hiss and beeps of Morse code, were astonished to hear Fessenden play Silent Night on the violin, followed by a reading of a passage from the Bible and a few words of greeting. Imagine the surprise and excitement of these men, stranded at sea, upon hearing a voice and a melody come from nowhere. This broadcast was a watershed moment, opening the door to broadcasting as we know it today. Another crucial figure was Lee De Forest, an American inventor who developed the Audion or triode tube in 1906. This was a fundamental technological advancement. The Audion was a vacuum tube that could amplify weak radio signals, making reception clearer and the transmission of voice and music much more practical. Without the Audion, radio transmissions would have been limited in range and quality. De Forest is considered the father of radio by some due to his invention of the triode tube, which was essential to the development of radio broadcasting. Radio quickly became more than a communication tool for military personnel and ships. Radio companies began to emerge, and the hobby of ham radio flourished. People built their own radios and attempted to capture signals from all over. It was a time of experimentation and discovery for the public. World War I-1914-1918 accelerated the development of radio technology as militaries of all nations recognized its strategic value. The need for fast and secure communication during wartime spurred significant innovations in amplifiers, transmitters, and receivers. Many young people who learned about radio during the war returned home with a new set of skills and a passion for the technology. After the war, the development of radio for commercial and entertainment purposes exploded. The first broadcast stations began to emerge. In 1920, KDAA in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, is widely considered the first commercial radio station to obtain a license and begin regular broadcasts in the United States. Its first news broadcast was the results of the 1920 presidential election on November 2nd. This marked the true birth of large-scale broadcasting. Imagine the excitement of a family sitting around a large radio set, hearing newscasts, music, and plays from the air for the first time. It was magical, a window to the world, connecting people in ways never before imagined. The revolutionary wave and its impact on society 1920 seconds became known as the radio age. From a laboratory experiment in 1895, radio had transformed into a mass phenomenon in less than 30 years. The speed of this adoption is impressive and demonstrates how thirsty society was for this new form of communication. Radio was not just a means of information. It was a cultural and social force. It brought the world into people's homes. Families gathered around the radio to listen to dramas, comedies, newscasts, religious sermons, and sports broadcasts. A new kind of shared experience was created. Think of the impact of an entire nation listening to the same presidential address or the same baseball game at the same time. This generated a sense of community and national identity that was previously much more difficult to achieve. Fun facts about the early radio: jingles and advertising. Radio quickly became a vehicle for advertising. The first jingles were sung live in the studio, and companies saw enormous potential in reaching millions of listeners directly in their homes. Radio advertising helped finance the industry's growth. Live programs. Almost all radio programs were live. Artists performed directly in the studios, and mistakes were part of the charm. This required enormous skill and professionalism from announcers and performers. Radio appearance. Early radios were large, often elaborate pieces of furniture, with wood paneling and many exposed knobs and valves. They were the centerpiece of the living room, a symbol of status and modernity. Radio theater. Before television, radio was the primary medium for dramas and comedies. Listeners used their imaginations to create scenes in their minds, and sound effects were produced live and ingeniously in the studios. Orson Welles' 1938 War of the Worlds, which simulated an alien invasion and caused panic among some people, is a famous example of radio's power to create vivid mental images. Radio also played a crucial role in politics and society. Leaders like President Franklin D. Roosevelt used radio to communicate directly with the American people through their famous fireside chats. These weekly broadcasts helped calm the nation during the Great Depression, building a personal connection between the president and his citizens. It was a voice of hope and leadership reaching millions of homes. Education also benefited from radio. Universities and schools began offering radio courses, expanding access to knowledge for those unable to attend physical institutions. Educational programs on science, history, and literature became popular. Music was undoubtedly one of radio's greatest beneficiaries. Previously regional musical genres, such as jazz, blues, and country music, were able to reach national and international audiences. Artists became overnight stars, and record labels saw a surge in record sales as people wanted to hear their favorite songs over and over again. Radio was not without its challenges. Issues of regulation, frequency allocation, and copyright soon arose. The government had to intervene to organize the radio spectrum and prevent interference between stations. The Federal Communications Commission (FCC) in the US, for example, was created in 1934 to regulate radio and later television communications. World War II 1939-1945 brought a new role to radio. It became the primary source of news and information about the conflict. News broadcasts, war speeches, and propaganda messages were crucial to maintaining public morale and coordinating the war effort. Broadcasters like Edward R. Murrow, broadcasting directly from bombed-out London, created a new form of radio journalism, bringing the reality of war into American homes. Radio united the Allied countries in a common cause. With the advent of television in the second half of the 20th century, radio had to adapt. Many programs and advertisers migrated to TV. However, radio did not disappear. It reinvented itself, focusing on music, local news, talk shows, and AM or FM. Radio has become a companion in the car, at work, and in everyday activities. Its portability and ability to provide instant, personalized information have ensured its survival and relevance. The evolution and future of voice on air since the spark of 1895, radio has come a long way. Today, wireless communication is ubiquitous, permeating nearly every aspect of our lives. What Marconi, Fessenden, and De Forest dreamed of became the foundation for technologies they could never have imagined. The evolution of radio led to innovations like FM radio, which offers higher sound quality and less interference than AM. Satellite radio like Sirius XM and digital radio brought even more choice and clarity to listeners. And of course, the internet has completely revolutionized the way we consume audio. Podcasts, for example, are the grandchildren of broadcasting. They bring the flexibility of listening to what you want, when you want, a concept that traditional radio couldn't offer. However, the audio-on-demand format owes much to the popularity of radio and the way it accustomed people to consuming audio content. Wireless technologies didn't stop with radio. Mobile communication, with cell phones and smartphones, is a direct descendant of radio waves. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, all these technologies we consider essential in our daily lives rely on the fundamental principles discovered and applied by Marconi and his predecessors. We are constantly surrounded by invisible electromagnetic waves, carrying voice, data, and images. Radio still plays a vital role today. In emergencies and natural disasters, when other forms of communication fail, radio, especially shortwave radio and amateur radio, often becomes the last line of communication. Its resilience and reach are invaluable when modern infrastructure fails. Furthermore, radio remains a powerful tool for local culture and social cohesion. Community radio stations serve small audiences, providing news, music, and programs that large broadcasters miss. In many parts of the developing world, radio remains the primary source of information and entertainment for millions of people. The history of radio is a testament to human curiosity, the persistence of innovation, and the power of communication. It shows us how a seemingly abstract idea can, with time and the effort of many, transform into a force that redefines society. The ability to connect people, disseminate information, and entertain the masses without the need for cables was, and continues to be, one of the greatest feats of engineering and human creativity. Speed of light. Radio waves travel at the speed of light, approximately 299,792,458 meters per second. This speed is what allows for near-instantaneous communication over long distances. Electromagnetic spectrum. Radio operates in a portion of the electromagnetic spectrum, which also includes visible light, X-rays, microwaves, and gamma rays. What differentiates these waves is their length and frequency. Shortwave. Shortwave radio transmissions are capable of traveling global distances because the waves are reflected by the Earth's ionosphere, allowing them to bounce around the globe. Marconi and the Nobel Prize. Guglielmo Marconi shared the 1909 Nobel Prize in Physics with Carl Ferdinand Braun for their contributions to the development of wireless telegraphy, the first broadcast. The exact first public radio broadcast is a matter of debate, depending on how one defines public and radio. However, Marconi's demonstration in 1895 is generally accepted as the beginning of practical broadcasts to a wider audience than just scientists. Impact on the Titanic. The sinking of the Titanic in 1912 highlighted the vital importance of radio. Although Morse code radio was used to send distress calls, the lack of regulations such as requiring 24-hour operators and standardized frequencies and equipment on all ships contributed to the tragedy. This event spurred the regulation of maritime radio. The invisible legacy and the voices of the futurist legacy of the first public radio broadcast is vast and largely invisible. The waves that Marconi, Fessenden, and De Forest freed from the confines of wires now permeate our environment, carrying an unimaginable amount of information every second. Communication that once required a messenger, a telegraph, or a wired telephone now happens instantaneously, connecting people and machines in a global network. Consider the less obvious impacts. Radio democratized access to information and entertainment. Before then, access to news and culture from other regions was a privilege for the few. With radio, the voice of the world could be heard in any home, regardless of distance or wealth. This had a profound social, cultural, and political impact, uniting nations and even influencing the way people thought. Radio was a social equalizer. The invention of radio also propelled the fields of electronics and engineering. The need to create better transmitters, receivers, amplifiers, and antennas led to technological advances that benefited many other areas of science and industry. Every new electronic device we use today, from a microchip to a smartphone, has its roots in the research and innovations that arose from the desire to improve wireless communication. Radio taught us about the power of sound. Without the need for images, audio became a powerful tool for telling stories, creating atmospheres, and evoking emotions. This art of audio production, with its sound effects, voices, and music, is the basis of what we see today in podcasts, audiobooks, and even movie soundtracks. Looking to the future, radio continues to adapt. The rise of artificial intelligence and augmented reality may bring new forms of audio consumption, perhaps with personalized radios that create content on demand or with immersive listening experiences. However, the fundamental principle, the transmission of information through invisible waves, will remain the same. The first public radio broadcast in 1895 was not just an isolated event. It was the starting point for a revolution we are still experiencing. It teaches us the importance of scientific curiosity, persistence in the face of skepticism, and the vision to connect the world. It is a celebration of human intellect and its relentless search for new ways to communicate, share, and connect. From the initial spark to the global information network we have today, the history of radio is the story of how humanity learned to make voices travel through the air, building invisible bridges between people and continents, and giving rise to the era of modern communication. It is a legacy that continues to unfold, shaping our present and paving the way for futures we cannot yet imagine. The patent dispute. The radio patent was the subject of long legal disputes, especially between Marconi and Nikola Tesla's estate. The U.S. Supreme Court, years after Tesla's death, overturned some of Marconi's patents in 1943, recognizing Tesla's priority in some of his inventions. However, this did not diminish Marconi's impact and credit in the commercialization and dissemination of radio. The voice changer. Before voice transmission, there were many attempts to send sounds by radio, some quite rudimentary. The term wireless was widely used before radio became popular. The Eiffel Tower and the radio. The Eiffel Tower in Paris, which many thought would be dismantled after the 1889 Universal Exhibition, was saved precisely because of its usefulness as a huge radio antenna for military and scientific experiments. First commercial radio message. The first paid commercial radio message in the U.S. was broadcast in 1922 by New York station WEEF, advertising an apartment complex on Long Island. Amateur radio. The hobby of amateur radio, ham radio, flourished in the first decades of the 20th century and was crucial to the development and experimentation of technology. Radio amateurs often made their own antennas and receivers. The radio balloon crisis. At one point, there were so many amateurs and stations on the air that the radio spectrum became chaotic, with constant interference. This led to the need for government regulation. The Branly coherer. The coherer, a key component in Marconi's early receivers, was based on an earlier invention by Duard Branly, a French physicist. Marconi improved and utilized it effectively. Broadwave broadcasting. The term broadcasting comes from the agricultural practice of broadcasting seeds, a metaphor for spreading information to a large audience. And so, we come to the end of our incredible journey through the history of the first public radio broadcast. We began with Maxwell's brilliant theories and Hertz's pioneering experiments, which laid the foundation for the invisible world of electromagnetic waves. We traveled to the Villa Griffone with the young and determined Marconi who turned theory into reality, culminating in that decisive demonstration in 1895. Next, we witnessed the human voice and music take to the airwaves with Fessenden and De Forest's crucial invention of the audion, which paved the way for the radio age of the 1920s. Today, radio can seem so commonplace that we take it for granted. But looking back, we realize that what began as a simple spark in a laboratory has become the backbone of all our modern wireless communication. From smartphones to navigation systems, everything that connects our world today has its roots in that bold vision of taking voice and information beyond wires. The history of radio is a powerful reminder of human curiosity, the persistence of innovation, and the importance of connecting the world. If you enjoyed this fascinating journey through the birth of modern communication, please like this video. It really helps us bring these incredible stories to more people. To not miss our next explorations of innovations that changed humanity, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. And if your curiosity is still piqued, click on the video now on the screen to continue learning with us. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope this story resonated with you. Until the next invention.